So it's like 9 o'clock at night. I've got 300 prairie dogs in the back of my truck, and I have all these nest boxes, and I maybe only had 100 prairie dogs. And I was trying to get these prairie dogs out into this translocation site. And it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm chasing daylight. I got an hour daylight left. I'm like, okay, I gotta get these guys in. And driving down the road, screaming in his truck, bringing all the dust behind him is this local rancher. And he screams up and he pulls in, and all the dust is flying in my face. And he's like, gets out of his truck and he slams the door and he's like, what in the cry tell are you doing with all these prairie dogs?
It is my absolute honor and privilege today, y'all, to welcome on Kristy Bly. Guys, Kristy is the black-footed ferret restoration manager at the Northern Great Plains. She's going to be talking to us all things black-footed ferret today, and she's from World Wildlife Fund. Kristy, we love the black-footed ferret here. This is like a dream come true kind of interview. Welcome to the show. Please tell us, give us a little bit of an introduction.
Vol 100 just subscribed for 4 months.
On who you are and what is
from SciAnts Streams.
What is the black-footed ferret, and why is that, like, why is this an important thing for us to chat about today?
I love it. Awesome. Well, hi and welcome and thank you. It's so much of a privilege to be here with all of you today, geeking out about ferrets, following so many other great presentations. So I am a Maple-made Vermonter who grew up running Vermont's Green Mountains and riding horses. And I fell into wildlife many, many moons ago. I grew up in the country. And so I got lucky enough to land at World Wildlife Fund in 2007, 19 years ago, and have been studying the black-footed ferrets for probably about 26 years now. The black-footed ferret is special for several reasons. Not only are they just cool, like masked bandits of the prairie, they've got this black mask, and they're these rowdy prairie predators that kill prey their size. They also have 3 reasons why they matter. Inherently, they are the only species native to North America. Native ferret species native to North America. Some of you may have heard of domestic ferrets or Siberian polecats, European polecats. Those are all kind of derivatives of ferrets, but the black-footed is the only one native to North America, so super cool there. Secondly, they are inherently a creature of North America. So they play an important role in the ecosystem as a mid-size or a small-size carnivore in the food chain. They eat prairie dogs. And then finally, they are important culturally, not just to us here in all of North America, but to Native American tribes who once revealed that they honored ferrets because they have this like chief nature. Ferrets are just rowdy little predators, right? And so warriors in the native world often refer to ferrets as warriors as well. So they often wore their pelts in their regalia and were buried with those in ceremonies. So very important for, inherent biological and cultural reasons.
So, Kristy, if I can ask, how does someone get into working with black-footed ferrets? Like, what drew you to this animal, in addition to it being, very cute, very cool looking, and important to the ecosystem? What got you excited to be able to work with it, and how does one get into working with a non-standard mammal like a rat or a mouse, right, but a black-footed ferret?
Well, luck in part, connections in second, and being in the right place in the right time in third. So I was actually on a track to study wolves and grizzly bears. And I really wanted to be a wolf biologist, so I was kind of heading that direction. But then fate interrupted, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. The universe said, well, I think we're going to send you to the prairie. I met this really cool guy. He worked for Turner Endangered Species Fund at the time. Ironically enough, he was the one that helped Yellowstone wolves come back to Yellowstone in Montana. His name is Mike Phillips. And I met Michael Phillips, and he was like, hey, why don't you come work with us in South Dakota? Mr. Turner, Ted Turner, would like to have black-footed ferrets return to his lands. And
Sorry,
so I was
this is the
like,
Ted Turner
okay,
of CNN, Ted Turner.
it is. It is. He is a
That's
phenomenal conservationist.
wow. What a cool
Yeah.
phone call. Okay, I
Yeah,
see it.
yeah, super cool. And I was like, wait, you want me to not work on wolves, but ferrets in South Dakota? I've never been to the Prairie. You know, I maybe did a drive through. Everyone talks about flyover states, but turns out there's a lot more to the Prairie than meets the original eye. I like to call it prairie dice because of all the reasons that Noel, Clay, and Dennis talked about already with prairie dogs, bison, and pollinators. It's just a cool place to be. So
It
yeah, I
is
kind of fell into it.
it's very surprising, right? Like you said, I think the commonplace thinking is that there's just these images of like flat grass and just that's it. And it's like
That's
this
it.
crazy teeming ecosystem with so many connections and so many animals inhabiting the ecosystem. Did you have that thought ahead of time as well that it was just like this grassland, or were you already well versed enough in like how diverse this ecosystem was, or if you weren't, what was that eye-opening moment that was like, oh my God, there's a lot here?
There's a lot here. No, I was not well versed. I had, grown up in Vermont's Green Mountains. I spent my career in college and post-college in the West, in the Rocky Mountains. I was a mountain girl. I am a mountain girl. I live in the mountains. I work on the prairie now. So landing in South Dakota was a bit of a culture shock. Um, the wide open plains, like you can just see forever in some of these places, right? It depends. Like if you are in Meeteetse, Wyoming, you are on a prairie and you've got massive mountain ranges nearby. You've got grizzly bears going through the prairie dog colonies next to cows and swift fox. There's all sorts of cool things. So it did take me a little while to really grasp what ecosystem I was in, but I also had another really great mentor, Joe Truitt, who also worked for Turner at the time, who enlightened me to this really cool world of this prairie ecosystem and all the dynamo parts of it. And honestly, if you hang out in a prairie dog town for like 5 minutes, you can't help but wonder, like, what's going on? Because it is like, it's chaos. It's like, these prairie dogs are talking, and there's raptors flying over, there's bobcats killing a prairie dog at the edge of the colony, there's a badger trotting through, there's pronghorn running, there's bison rolling. I mean, like, wow, it is not a flyover state. And anybody who says that hasn't spent enough time there.
It was described to us that the prairie dogs are the chicken nuggets of the plains, and that's how you were describing too. It's like everything's here hunting, and even the vegetarians are hanging out. Like it's what a cool ecosystem, right? Now, I think the big question then is what is it? Why the black-footed ferret? When you got this phone call that, hey, I want this animal returned to my land, why was it not there? What was it that led, what was the state that we were dealing with in that? Why weren't they there? What happened to them? And how do you even go about bringing them back?
Yeah, such a great question. Two-part answer. One is that I had worked with endangered species before, so I was super intrigued because I actually didn't really know much about black-footed ferrets at the time either. So it was kind of crash course. And secondly, they are kind of the poster child for how North America was converted with European settlement. So with European settlement came plows that cultivated native prairie into row crop agriculture, corn, wheat, soy, everything that we eat today. If you look at the Great Plains ecosystem, in the middle of our country, it's the bread and butter basket for feeding all of us, right? And that was a huge initiative back in the 1800s, was bringing in the plow, growing crops, raising cattle, and that displaced not only prairie dogs, a whole lot of other species too. But so we say that the reason ferrets weren't there, or why they declined, relate to 3 Ps: plow up, native prairie to row crop agriculture; poison, large-scale government-sponsored poisoning programs aimed at removing prairie dogs from the landscape. There's a gentleman named C. Hart Merriam, who was part of this biological service, which is now the Fish and Wildlife Service, back in the early 1900s, who declared prairie dogs as a pest because they ate grass, and cows eat grass. And at the time, raising cattle was the priority. And so there was basically this massive campaign to eliminate prairie dogs. And as some of you may know or recall, predators went with it. We actually killed off elk and a lot of deer and antelope too. So a lot of native species with the early settlement of North America were eliminated at that same time. So we have plow-up, we have poison, and thirdly, we have plague, which Noel talked about last week. Non-native disease, it's a bacteria spread by fleas to mammalian hosts like ferrets and prairie dogs. And because they didn't evolve with it, there's no natural resistance to it, or at least in very, very minute parts. And so they are highly susceptible to it. So when prairie dogs were plowed up and removed, habitat and the food source for ferrets also went, because ferrets are obligate predators or dependent nearly fully on prairie dogs for survival. You rarely find a ferret outside of a prairie dog colony. They evolved together over many, many years.
So with the decline of the prairie dog, so it wasn't necessarily, or was it too, that the black-footed ferrets were also being targeted? Because I can imagine a situation where there could be misinformation campaigns of, oh, they might grab our chickens or other kind of, right, farm animals, like almost, again, this, like, we need to get rid of it because there's this theory that something happens. I know Noelle was telling us that prairie dog holes dug down in the soil, people thought that maybe the cows or horses would step on the holes and break legs, and she was telling us there was no documented case of this happening, but it was this idea rooted into people that they are an inconvenience and we should get rid of them. Was there an element to that too on the ferret side of thing, or was it wholly just the wipeout of the prairie dog?
Yeah, ferrets were not very well known in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Like, even though, they had evolved in Europe like 3 to 4 million years ago, and they dispersed into Siberia over the Bering Land Bridge, and they've been in North America for probably 100,000 plus years. They are nocturnal, meaning they're only awake at night, and they there's just so few of them. We thought maybe there were 500 to a million of them, 500,000 to a million of them at one point in time, but they live underground and they are nocturnal. So there wasn't a targeted campaign to eliminate ferrets. They were kind of just a consequence of the elimination of prairie dogs or the drastic decline of prairie dogs of the landscape, 95 to 98% with European settlement, and at least abundance and distributional range of prairie dogs. But that whole stack of the 3 Ps accumulated into the species, thinking, by 1967, we thought they were extinct, right? So kind of crazy that we could have such a severe impact.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to show what a keystone species that prairie dog was too, right? Because you got rid of the prairie dog, that, like you said, it obligate predator, that's what they eat. You would predict that there would be a collapse, but now you got to see it in real time, and like you said, it was thought to be extinct. So how did we rediscover the black-footed ferret? What was the kind of signal that, hey, there's actually some still left?
Yeah, great question. I mean, their story of black-footed ferrets and their history is pretty cool. So in 1967, we thought they were extinct, and they were listed on the precursor to the Endangered Species Act. And then in 1972, a very small population of black-footed ferrets was discovered in South Dakota. So there was an attempt to learn about ferrets there, and we didn't know a lot about them. I'm pretty sure Lewis and Clark maybe documented them at one point in time. I didn't go back to find that passage, but we still didn't really know much about ferrets at the time. What they needed, what their life habits were, what their life history was. There was definitely some documentation of them as a species, but for management and captive breeding wise, we didn't. So there was an attempt to capture ferrets in South Dakota and bring them into captivity. And that effort failed in terms of like, we just didn't know enough about how to keep ferrets alive at the time. So that population in captivity blinked out. And then the population in South Dakota, which was at that point in time, the last known population, blinked out shortly thereafter, likely due to plague. Ferrets are also susceptible to canine distemper, which is a native disease, but the prairie dog population had crashed there too. So we suspect it was probably plague at the time. So at that point in time, we're thinking, okay, well, we thought they were extinct in 1967, and here it is early, 1970s, and we think they're extinct again. So that was like by 1979, we're like, oh man, okay, these guys are extinct completely. Then, dun, 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 a ranch dog named Shep saved the day. So this ranch dog, he's probably one of the more famous dogs, maybe not as famous as Lassie, but he brought a carcass to his owners, John and Christine Hogg, or John and Lucille Hogg, in Meeteetse, Wyoming, this sleepy town, one of the most beautiful prairie sites I've ever been on, actually. Brings this carcass to John and drops it at its feet, and he's like, well, I don't know what the heck this is, and he chucks it, right, puts it in the trash, but he tells Lucille about it, and Lucille's like, well, that sounds interesting, let's take it to the taxidermist and get it stuffed. So they take it to the local taxidermist, and the taxidermist is like, oh my word, this is an endangered black-footed ferret. So things were really exciting. All these biologists descend on this tiny little town and this ranch where these prairie dogs and this last known ferret that Shep the dog either killed or, one story was that it had come in and was eating, kibble or cat food off the porch or something. So anyway, Shep saves the day. So at that point in time, that was 1981. Then there was like 120-ish black-footed ferrets there. So there was this cool opportunity to like really learn about ferrets then, because we had basically a second chance at saving the species. So there was a ton of research done, collaring ferrets, finding all we could about ferrets, learning how to mitigate plague, how to kill fleas. There were some attempts to kill fleas because 4 years later, in 1985, plague did show up at that site and start killing prairie dogs. So there was an emergency effort to bring the remaining ferrets into captivity and hope to save the species yet again. And in the cool part about that, there's two cool pieces, is one, scientists and biologists at the time had the foresight to be like, let's collect some genetic samples of these critters and send them to the frozen zoo in San Diego. Brilliant. Stay tuned. There's more to that story later, and hopefully you'll ask a couple questions. If not, we can circle back to that. But the other cool thing is they caught 24 ferrets, 18 survived, and of those, 7 became the genetic founders of all ferrets alive in the wild in captivity today. So you want to talk about bottlenecks. You want to talk about nearly losing a species. Pretty cool that we went down to 18 individuals in captivity. And, shortly after this rescue attempt at this site in Meeteetse, that wild population of prairie dogs and ferrets died out. So that was kind of crazy. And that was 1987. The whole thing went kaput. And at that point in time, there were no known ferrets in the wild. So then you fast forward, right, to like captive breeding attempts were successful this time. And by 1991, the reintroduction of ferrets occurred to the wild again in this like Herculean feat of saving this very endangered species.
So, Kristy, what goes into the idea of whether or not you're going to bring in these animals? Because that seems like a near impossible decision, right? It's the last of their kind. They're out here in this field. Do you bring them all in and try to a breeding program? Like you said, the genetic bottlenecks, and you could cause like absolute genetic chaos at this instance. Or do you leave them? Can you talk to us just about like what in like terms of the bioethics approach to it? Like how does one decide how to do this, right? Because it seems like, again, an impossible decision. It's like, well, this is our fault, so we should probably do this. But at the same time, we're
Right?
then
Right?
intervening. Like, how does, how did the crew, or how would you as a conservation biologist come up with what you would think is the right answer in this kind of scenario?
That is such a cool question, and one that it makes me think I should be asking some of the really amazing people that were there in that time, who are my mentors, what they were thinking. But I think, because the South Dakota population had plagued out and they had learned that plague was an issue for prairie dogs and ferrets, and that at that point in time, we didn't have a lot of information on how to vaccinate ferrets. We didn't have a lot of information on like really how to kill fleas effectively. And there was, when plague hits a prairie dog colony, as Noel had talked about, it can go really fast in this epizootic phase and just simmer through this entire colony really quickly. And within a couple of weeks, that whole prairie dog colony can be dead. And without stopping that, and without vaccinating ferrets, um, the risk was to lose it all forever. Right. So, yes, there were anthropogenic causes to the decline of ferrets, the unintentional introduction of plague into our North American ecosystem, plow up and poison. And, do you want it on your shoulders to lose this species? And if you had an opportunity to try again, knowing that in South Dakota, they couldn't stop plague, but they knew a little bit more about captive breeding at the time. So I feel like it was a pretty amazing place to be at the time, and that the people that were there believed in the chance of survival of this species and did not want it on their conscience to let it fail a second time.
It's incredible, right? And it's just such a,
Mhm.
like, because it was successful too, is such a cool example of how working together we can actually make that difference. Because like you said, it
It's
was
huge.
it was it 135 number of ferrets when they started at the site. They caught 18 of those. Not all of them were able to be breeding, and so it was 7 founders in terms of the genetic. Like, the numbers are not on your side, right, at
No, not at
all.
all.
And then, like, fast forward 6 years later, now we have release of them. It's like, that's a crazy
Isn't it
success
crazy?
story.
It's
We
crazy.
need to dig into this, Chrissy, right? We need to highlight this
Right.
success story. How does one, just on the base level, start a breeding program, right? Like, how do you know who to breed, where to breed? What tech did you have at that point in time versus now that helps us inform how to do this? Because, now we can do sequencing. I imagine it's much easier to decide
Oh,
who to
yeah.
mate with.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but,
That's
co-
a great question. And,
yeah.
I'm not a geneticist, but there are some amazing people that at that time, there was this like wall with a huge, like, I'm not kidding. I'm old enough to tell you, I lived before the days of cell phones and even laptop computers. Okay. So back then, and we're talking in the 80s, um, there was a big wall that was essentially a big spreadsheet that had all the individuals, and they were like literally playing Jenga and trying to mix and match. And, a lot of it too is like breeding readiness, breeding um, acceptance, because not all females will accept a male. Like, it's actually kind of cool. Like, if you watch a male get introduced into a female's breeding pen, she will like smell him out and there's some chitter and chatter, and she will come up out of her burrow and pull him down into the nest box. So there is female choice at a certain extent. So I can't give you all the details about back then how they figured it all out, but my friend Paul Marineri, who was with the Fish and Wildlife Service then and led some of those early breeding efforts, and a whole bunch of other experts that helped with like maximizing genetic diversity, understanding artificial insemination to also maximize genetic diversity to get the most out of those pairings. And now there's all sorts of computer programming and it does it for you. But yeah, I think it is not a black and white science, and it takes an incredible amount of learning for not only like how to maximize genetic diversity, but like what temperatures need to be in the captive breeding facilities. How do you keep unintentional diseases out, like coccidia? How do you, what kind of lighting, what kind of food source? Like if you have plague, and if you think about plague, it came into the San Francisco harbor in California in the early 1900s and kind of like simmered to the meridian on the western border, north-south of South Dakota, and then stopped. You only had plague-free prairie dogs back then east of South Dakota, in South Dakota and east of there. So having food sources that were consistently available and disease-free were challenging. So there's been like all sorts of factors that have to go into like, what do ferrets need? How do we maximize their health? How do we keep them entertained while in captivity? How do we keep them safe and disease-free? And then how do they maximize productivity? And then how do we get these babies out into the wild again, right? So there's like so much innovation and partnership that goes into that, and just sheer brain power, you know?
Yeah, that's like one of the other like crazy elements, right? Is how you decide when a population is ready for release and who you're releasing, because you're dealing with such low numbers that it feels like, right, every single individual is so valuable in terms of numbers and genetics.
Yes.
How does one decide who's going to be put out in the wild, and how does one do that? Like, you said mentioned canine distemper was something that they could also acquire. Do you vaccinate them ahead of time? Do you treat with insecticide for fleas right in the area before you release them? Like, what goes into, I guess, then at that time versus now, like a release?
Yeah, it's a huge process. So a couple things, when females have kits, those kits usually stay with her. So they're actually mating now, March, April. And then in about 70 days, kits equal baby ferrets, are usually ready to come above ground. So, in traditional senses, they live below ground. So in captivity, there are these kind of above ground cages with a burrow system that goes down into a nest box. So ferret moms have their babies down there, and there's a whelping success rate on average. There's 5 breeding facilities in North America. They're wildly successful, and the whelping and survival rates are astoundingly high because they've gotten so good at breeding ferrets and understanding how to keep everybody alive. Those ferret kits usually stay with mom through the summer and disperse on their own in the fall. And so we take that natural tendency for them to leave. And then again, there's some formula that says, okay, well, we might need to keep 1 or 2 of these offspring back to add to the breeding program to maximize diversity, or we're going to take X% of them and send them to the wild. But first they need to go through, we call it prairie dog boot camp, where you can't just, we learned over time, you can release captive ferrets into the wild, but they become Scooby snacks for badgers and swift foxes and coyotes. And, they typically get released late in the afternoon, early evening because they're nocturnal. So great horned owls, if there are trees nearby, they just scoop them up. So we learned that if you put ferrets out into these semi-wild, semi-contained pens above a prairie dog colony or with burrows with prairie dogs, and you put the moms into these wild pens, so to speak, to teach the kits how to kill prairie dog before they get released, then those that successfully kill can get released. Those that are like, I'd rather just have my food delivered to me, either go back as a display animal, or if their genetics are valuable, then they'll get added back to the breeding program. It's pretty it's pretty
It's
elaborate.
really cool.
It's not
and
it's not like you breed them in captivity and you ship them out. Like,
Yeah.
they have to go through school.
I think one important element to highlight here too is that with so few that were brought in, how much had to be learned about their fundamental biology to be to be able to know that you need a boot camp, right? Because sometimes these animals have an instinct that I know what to do, release me and I'm good. It's really cool there's this maternal learning going on, but it also further complicates things for you guys.
Yeah, it's huge. And then the science of like what goes into those pens is also huge. The Fish and Wildlife Service in Colorado. This is where the boot camp program and the wild pens are. And it's phenomenal. Like that in of itself is a science and a project of like pen size and safety, because you have to keep them covered from raptors coming down and picking them up, or snakes climbing over and killing them, or killing the prairie dog in there or whatever it is. So it's like, they've got to spend some time out in those out in the pen so that they learn what it feels like to be outside, and they have that natural flow of being wild again. And that is somewhat inherent. And it also improves survival if they go through this program. And that's one of the school of hard knocks that early day biologists in the ferret world learned.
How long does that boot camp last? Is that like individualized per each of the individual kits that are released, and then you just wait and see? Or is there like, okay, we have them out here for 2 weeks, after which we're going to just see who killed and who's going out?
Yeah, so I think, and again, this is not my area of expertise either. They have to be in there at least a couple of weeks, I believe, and they do go in with mom. And a lot of it is about, again, another very complicated piece, the timing. Okay, like when would these kits normally be weaned and ready to go out on their own? And when is a wild release site ready to take them, right? So there's like all of these, like, it's a pretty big game of like coordination and partners. So like this is the time of the year where site managers who host prairie dogs who want ferrets or have ferrets in the wild will then send an allocation request to the Fish and Wildlife Service that says, I would like to have 20 ferret kits for release at my site, ideally in September or October. Or if you're down in Arizona, you may be doing a spring release, because the Gunnison's prairie dogs go into hibernation in the winter and ferrets will starve if they can't find them. So, there's all sorts of things like ferrets do differently. Ferrets get released at different times depending on the species and location, but there's just a lot of pieces that go into that.
I imagine too, you kind of alluded to this on the pieces, different state boundaries, right? So your state laws that you're getting into different fish and wildlife departments, but depending on state and region. You talked about tribal lands as well.
Private lands.
The rancher, yeah. I think one thing that we talked about in this interview series is just some of the logistical work that y'all do at WWF to be able to do what you need to do. Kristy, can you tell us a little bit, what does that logistical minefield look like? Like, because again, I think it's really cool that we can say, order the ferrets on your little Amazon checklist almost, you get it delivered, they get sent out. But I think it's important for folks to know just how much is actually going into this, a successful release of one of these kits into an area to restore that ecosystem. Like, what all do you have to go through to manage to ensure that this kind of event can actually happen?
Yeah, great question. Fully loaded, lots of things to say here. So, we just talked about all the things that go into getting a ferret kit ready for a release. And to circle back, all kits born in captivity, approved for release, get vaccinated against canine distemper and plague. So canine distemper is a one-shot wonder. The plague vaccine is 1 plus a booster, good for their lifetime, right? Then they get a microchip so that we know who they are and can track them through their life once they get released. So that's that. So yeah, once we get everybody ready.
Naive question, Kristy. With the chip, does that have a tracker? So can you track individuals like GPS wise, or is it a tracker where when you catch one, you scan and then you get the ID, or both?
Great question. It's passive, like a microchip for your dog or cat. And so I've been dreaming, and I'm really hoping someday technology will come forward where you can like have that reverse. Right now, you have to have an animal in hand, and you have to have an avid reader. It's called a reader, It's a chip reader, that syncs and picks up their individual ID, and then you check your roster and you know who it is. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a 4-year-old female that's still out here. How cool is that? Anyway, there's some really fun stories that come down the pipe with that. And what would be really cool is if those microchips actually transmitted out, and you could put just space stations and pick up who's who and who's where. It would be so much easier than staying out all night looking for these guys, which is a whole nother thing we can talk about. But
if you have time, Kristy, we would love to hit on all these because
oh my gosh, it's so cool. And I want to
can't
show you some videos too.
I can't tell you how much the community here loves black-footed ferrets, and we name dropped the Frozen Zoo a little bit earlier. We actually did a live stream from the Frozen Zoo, the first ever stream to ever do it. So we are huge fans. So we need to touch on that. We just gotta hit everything. If you have the time, we need you to hear the chat all things ferret.
I'm here. It's very exciting. I love ferrets too. So then it's like, okay, well, where do these ferrets go? And this is not an overnight thing. Like, so if you have prairie, so there's qualifications that a site has to have in order to be able to receive ferrets and become a ferret reintroduction site. So since 1991, when the first releases were occurring, there's been 36 places where ferrets have been reintroduced, and only 14 of those have ferrets today, 14 or 15. We can talk about that later. But in order to be a site, you have to have enough prairie dog acres. You have to have healthy prairie dog densities, meaning there's enough prairie dogs in this habitat for ferrets to survive, because ferrets love high density prairie dog colonies, because ferret moms really need those prairie dog babies, prairie dog pups to feed their kits. So anyway, that's really complicated. You have to have, the large size. You have to have all sorts of permits in terms of like not only a transport permit, between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the state in which you're releasing. So that's usually a state to federal relationship. But you have to have an agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service that's either like a safe harbor agreement. There's another term called a 10J agreement, where there's just like, this is a reintroduction zone, and there's an agreement between the site manager, which is either a federal, state, private, or tribal partner. That then they say, okay, here's the area where we are going to make sure we protect ferrets. Maybe here's an area that we need to make sure that prairie dogs aren't impacting our ranching neighbors. And that gets decided between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the site host, site manager. And you have to have, each site has to have their own permissions, right? So like in the case of some Native Nation sites, they usually pass what's called a resolution of support that says, ferrets are culturally important to us, biologically they matter to us, we want them here. We are going to justify and accept this release and all the things that come with it. And then you need money, you need people, because recovering ferrets is not cheap. So you have to know that you have at least 1,500 acres of black-tailed prairie dog colonies. You need to have at least 3,000 acres of whitetails or gunnisons to release ferrets. And honestly, that's not enough acres to maintain enough ferrets, but it's a start. You need to have the ability for those sites to grow. And you need to make sure that if you have a lot of conflicts with boundaries, like if you have a small site with not a lot of room to grow and you've got like some state land and some Bureau of Land Management land, or some private rancher who none of those people want prairie dogs or ferrets, then you've got to have the ability to manage that boundary. And if there's too much conflict, the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't want to put ferrets there. So there's some social side of things that go there too. So I always like to call it, I'm into puzzles, right? So like biological plus social plus financial. You have to have those three pieces in order for a site to work. And then you've got to have people there ready to manage, and you've got to have money ready to protect prairie dogs from plague, as Noel talked about, and then annually be able to live trap ferret kits born into the wild and vaccinate them against canine distemper and plague. And that's what's really fun, trapping ferrets.
Is that also like the expensive part too? Like because you mentioned there's this active monitoring, so like staffing and then actually going and catching, right, the animals that you were mentioning, like camping out at night. To go try to catch them. And I imagine too, to monitor the population numbers to see how many kits there are, and then catching them, vaccinate. And then you mentioned too, one of them is a double injection, right? With the booster. So Kristy, what goes into that? Like,
it's huge. So let's talk about like one of my favorite sites, the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in northern Montana, right? They've got a wildlife biologist there, and that's it. He's one guy. And he has to recruit volunteers. Sometimes he's lucky enough to have money to hire a technician, but he doesn't even have money to cover his own salary. So he has to write grants, or I help him write grants to do that. Then he has to have money to map prairie dog colonies to see how big it is in his like ferret recovery area. How many acres are there? He has to get estimates of prairie dog density. So, you know, a lot of times he's doing this by himself. Otherwise, you know, we help him with volunteers, or we help him, or we get a technician. We're working on a strike team to send people around to help ferret sites now. But then he has to spend, there's 3 survey periods we typically do each year for ferrets, especially at this site. Most sites do this too. One is the kit survey. You talked about that. How many ferret kits were born into the wild this fall? Like, so come late July, August, we will do the first kit survey. And that is just taking spotlights on a truck. I can show you a video later. And looking for their emerald green eye shine at the top of their prairie dog burrow, driving to the burrow that they're in, placing a little ring reader over the entrance of the burrow, hoping they come up through to read their chip. You know, kind of getting a head count, an ID count, and then how many kits and how many litters. So that's like one 10-night period where you're going out from sundown to sunup, and you better hope that you're really good at being nocturnal, and you kind of have to go nocturnal. Like, you can't just be like me where you can't sleep during the day and you sleep like 2 hours and then you stay up at night for 15 hours, and you do this for 10 nights in a row. So then we do that, and then we take a break, and then there's the first live trapping session where, again, it's 10 nights. And at this point, the biologist at Belknap, he's recruited like 4 other people, and we all go out with our spotlights and with our traps, and we go out, and not only do we track them down to their burrows to get the reading, we throw a trap over, we bring them out once we trap them, put them into the hospital trailer where Tevin and our friend Jessica vaccinate them against canine distemper. If they need a microchip, they get a microchip, and they get released back. Yeah, and then so that's like the second 10-night period. We sometimes use drones and thermal cameras to help track ferrets down. Another really cool innovation about ferret recovery. And then the second, or the last period, survey period, so kit surveys, first trapping session, then the second trapping session is the booster session. And that has to be, you know, 2 to 4 weeks later. So, you know, we're looking at trapping ferrets starting in late July, early August, all the way through October. Yeah, in that second trapping session, you hope to catch the ones you caught before. Sometimes they're stinkers and you can't always get them. Or you're trapping and getting the first inoculations to the ferrets you missed in the first trapping session. So, you know, you're just catching whatever you can, as much as you can. And you just hope for great nights and very active ferrets.
If you do catch them, like the first time on the second go around, or you don't catch them the second go around, you still give them the first injection, right, for the vaccine, and then if you catch them
next year, you hope to catch them.
Yeah, next year, then you just give them the booster at that point. So there's kind of some built-in buffer that you've got, and because you scan them, you'll know if you've given them or not before the boosters.
Yeah, so everyone in the truck has a list of who's who and who's had what vaccines. So there are times where you'll catch somebody, they're like, oh, they've had both shots and their microchip, we don't need to bring them in, you know? And so we just release them. And then we try to catch their kits. And sometimes those guys can be little buggers.
The difficulty of doing that is just, it's wild. You mentioned drones, Kristy. Why are we using first of all, the thermal cameras sound incredible, right? Those sound like, you know, like a military operation. You're going to extract the black-footed ferret. What with the drone, is that just like to make it easier for the ferrets to not detect you because it's quieter? Or how drones?
Great question. So there's a multi-part answer to this too. So the traditional method is getting in a truck. So these sites are really big, right? 3,000 acres to 100,000 acres, right? And you can't survey 100,000 acres in one shot. So there's a strong need to maximum. So there's a lot to say here. So in order to remove ferrets from the endangered species list, you have to count them every year, right? So our goal is 3,000 breeding adults in the wild. We have less than 300 today, so we've got a long way to go. However, we don't know how many we have in the wild unless we're out looking for them and counting them and vaccinating them. So you do that with this truck mounted spotlight. You're driving back and forth through prairie dog colonies all night long for as many nights as you can stand it, and finding as many ferrets as you can, right? This spotlight, as you go through, relies on line of sight. That ferret has to be in the burrow looking at you at the same time you drive by with a spotlight, and you catch their eyes and you're like, oh, what was that? Right? So you're trying to get them. It's very labor intensive. We're loud. The trucks are like, across the prairie dog town. Oh, sorry. I woke the beast. Sorry, I got an old dog here today. And so the ferrets sometimes are curious. The kids can be like, what's happening? What are you doing? And you can you can shine a spotlight on them and they're like dancing around and it's not a problem. Others are like, oh man, here comes those trucks and we're going to go under and we're not coming back out. So there is that invasive part of trucks, and the fact that you need somebody to drive around and be looking, and it takes a long time to cover these areas. Sometimes you don't have enough people. Sometimes you can't drive across parts of the prairie or get across that big gully in order to get to this other site because that bridge washed out or whatever. So hence the drones. The drones can come in. And what's cool about the drones is that they are attached with thermal cameras, and thermal cameras can detect the heat signature of the entire body of an animal, not just their eye shine. So you've got a huge advantage having a thermal camera, not only for the fact that they can cover more ground more quickly, but that they can detect the heat signature of these guys. And it's so cool. I've got a video I can show you. They come out of the burrow and they're like dancing around. And so you can be like, oh, there's a ferret, there's a ferret, there's a ferret. You still need people in trucks to go trap those ferrets. So you can't have one or the other. You have to have both. And the drone with thermal camera helps us find ferrets faster and detects ferrets that we're missing. So one time we were looking, we had this drone hovering around. We're like, oh my gosh, there's a ferret, there's a ferret, but there's a ferret. We also had a thermal camera on a tower that was kind of scanning. And as one truck had stopped to set a trap, there were 3 ferrets running around on the backside of the truck. And they're like, oh yeah, turn around, there's 3 more ferrets behind you. And those are the things you can't just do with a spotlight, so, and the drones can cover areas that are harder to get to by truck. You still have to be following all the FAA regulation rules and line of sight and all that good jazz, but it does improve and increase detection. And some of the prairie dog species, as Noel talked about, like the blacktails are the most prolific, and they are also the most dense. So their burrows are close together. Ferrets are a little bit more consolidated in those areas. Whitetails and Gunnison's prairie dogs, their burrows are far apart. There might be sagebrush in the middle, mesquite, anything like that. And so a drone can help see through some of the things that a spotlight couldn't necessarily cut through, if that makes sense.
Do you get any penetration of the ground using the heat, or is it just like the surface level? And I guess at what depth can you go to? Because I know that we talked with Noel, the inside of the prairie dog nest is kind of crazy time in terms of the complexity. Do you get any of the depth measurement?
Cool. So what's interesting is that thankfully ferret surveys happen in the late summer, fall, and you hope that there's enough of a temperature gradient between the ground and the air to be able to pick that up. I'm sorry. We do pick up the burrows, prairie dog burrows. They're deep, right? 10 to 15 feet deep, and they have all these temperature gradients, and there's heat that emits out of the entrance of a burrow. So we do pick up circular prairie dog burrow openings. We can also pick up rocks that have had heat from the day, the summer day. So yeah, there's that too. It's pretty cool. And in terms of depth, that takes like ground penetrating radars and that kind of thing. Like we're not looking, although it'd be really cool. And there's some really cool stuff that Smithsonian is doing with like tracking collars on ferrets and prairie dogs underground to see how they're relating. So we can get kind of a sense of where they're going underground. But so far we haven't been able to get any kind of deep, penetration to map that out at night.
It would be cool, I guess, like you said, if we had the trackers that allowed that GPS coordinates and almost like that LiDAR look to it, that you can get the depth and you can get like their social structure information. One thing that you said that was super, well, I mean, all that you're saying, Kristy, is super striking, but the goals, right? That you want 3,000 in the wild and we're at 300. That's a huge gap, right? What do you think is the big reason for that difficulty in terms of the numbers to be able to release? What is driving that, and what is the, I guess, if you had a silver bullet for a solution, if I could tell you, I grant whatever wish that you tell me, how do you, like, what is that fix, do you think?
So two things: solve the plague riddle. If we could keep plague at bay, we could keep more prairie dogs alive, we keep more ferrets alive. Secondly, social tolerance. If prairie dogs were tolerated in more places, in larger areas, we could get better. We could do better with ferret recovery. And then third, funding. It's really expensive. We need like $20 million a year to recover the species. And there is no government, there's no federal line item dedicated to wild ferret recovery. There's money that goes to retaining the captive breeding program, and even then it's peanuts. But sites that host ferrets in the wild have to raise their own money to support surveys. So, and plague mitigation is expensive. It's, $30 an acre at optimistically, and it's one of those things that you have to just be on it. So magic wand, we would have CRISPR technology to edit out the plague response gene in both prairie dogs and ferrets. Or we do it in fleas. Like, there's some pretty cool conversations about that happening now. Socially, is that acceptable? I don't know. But, prairie dog colonies used to be really large. And some of the most successful sites we have are 15,000 acres and larger. And we need those big sites to recover the species. And without them, it's harder.
15,000 acres, $30 an acre, optimistically, to get rid of the plague. Like, just that one site alone, Kristy.
Just that one site alone. And that doesn't even include monitoring, habitat, like prairie dog mapping, ferret surveys, ferret vaccination, any other research you want to do,
that's just for the plague mitigation, nothing else.
Just to prevent prairie dogs from dying from fleas infected with plague. It's crazy town. So what's really cool, and this is why I feel like we are a small but mighty group. I'm very sorry about the dog. She just had surgery. She's an old dog, and I cannot get her to stop barking today.
If it helps, I can't hear it.
Oh,
I can't hear any barking. Okay. And we love. I have a cat sleeping next to me. We are pet forward and pet friendly here.
Well, thank you I will pretend it's not happening then. So we're a small but mighty group. Like, we talked a little bit about, wildlife does not recognize jurisdictional boundaries, right? Like, they don't know whether they're on a private landowner site who hates prairie dogs and doesn't want them there versus, a public land site where they're okay but might get shot. It's hard to say. So what we have to be is collective as a group, because there are so many people. There are feds, states, tribes, private landowners, zoos, northern, non-governmental organizations, academic institutions, individuals who are interested in helping with ferret recovery. It takes a huge team to recover the species and keep it alive. And we have one goal: recovering 3,000 breeding adults. So we are all laser focused. Yes, do we have individual sites that we're managing and helping? And do some of those individual sites have different goals, different levels of funding, different challenges? Absolutely. But we are all moving forward in the same direction. And one thing that's been really cool over time is, like, okay, we know that plague is the primary biological threat to black-footed ferrets. How do we make it more affordable? Because we can't afford to keep doing this, like, especially now with all the federal budget cuts and conservation funding cuts and the competitive nature of existing funding. For a small group of people doing the same thing, we have had to get really creative. So Noelle talked about Fitbits. fipronil-laced baits or edible peanut butter baits that our friend Randy Matchett from the Fish and Wildlife Service developed. And they are much cheaper, closer to $9-10 an acre to make and distribute, and distributing by drones and all-terrain vehicles. So there's some really cool things coming down the pipe. Spent a lot of time to look at, like, how do you make a bait that doesn't disintegrate when it goes through a hopper in a triple shooter? So World Wildlife Fund and Fish and Wildlife Service and Model Avionics and a couple other awesome partners, we developed these cool patented delivery mechanisms to get these baits out. But then it's like, oh, well, they need to be frozen. And then when they thaw, they stick and they jam. And then we can't keep going out in the field and doing all this stuff. So, there's just so much to sort out. But we're getting there. I think social tolerance of prairie dogs is a really big thing. There are places where people tolerate prairie dogs in the landscape and can live harmoniously with them. They've evolved with bison, they do well with cattle, but when we ask them to share the same acre of grass as cows, prairie dogs often lose in that situation. And so we are trying really hard to find ways to make it profitable or tolerable for people raising livestock to live with prairie dogs. And where it's not tolerable, we just don't have ferrets. But in order for us to be successful in reaching 3,000 adults, we need more places. We need more tolerance. We need more people that are willing to do that, host habitat and not shoot prairie dogs, essentially.
I think two questions, Kristy. One is like more sites, right? You mentioned that at one point it was 35 sites and now we're down into the teens in terms of the numbers. Why does that shift happen? And then what would be if again, magic wand scenario, ideal amount of land and ideal number of prairie dogs to foster that 3,000 black-footed ferret number?
Great question. We used to say 500,000 acres, but with drought and changing climatic conditions, we probably need like 1.5 million acres from Canada to Mexico, Rocky Mountain front to Missouri River to recover ferrets. Drop in the bucket. It is less than 1% of available prairie dog habitat in North America. Like, it is peanuts, right? However, locally, it can be challenging for some individuals who are raising livestock to have prairie dogs on the land, especially when the rain doesn't fall, right? So when the rain doesn't fall, the grass doesn't grow, and prairie dogs move out and grow into bigger areas. Their densities are lower. There's not as many prairie dogs per acre, but their footprint gets bigger, and that's challenging, right? But then if the rains don't come, the grass doesn't grow, prairie dog pups don't get born, ferret moms can't kill anything as readily, can't keep their kids alive, and it's like this horrible cycle. Then prairie dogs go into the winter starving. If it's a hard winter, then they don't survive over winter, and then ferrets don't survive because it's tricky.
There doesn't seem to be any really, like you said, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of the amount of land that's available, but it also has to be connected, right? And that connectivity of the land, I think, makes it also difficult, right? In order to connect
with ferrets and prairie dogs, there's not a lot of like meta exchange. Like, it's not like a pronghorn antelope that needs to have migratory routes and be able to go between wintering grounds and summering grounds and connect to other populations. Meta population connection is phenomenal and ideal for maximizing genetic diversity and improving robustness of populations. We always talk about we want redundance, resiliency, and repetition in wildlife populations in order to be able to make sure they can persist in the face of all of these episodic crazy things like unintended big storms or floods or droughts or whatever it is, in order for animals to survive some of these catastrophic events or even minor ones. That metapopulation connectivity matters. I think prairie dogs are a lot more, even though they're a little bit of like an amoeba that kind of be on the landscape, they are very concrete in where they are. And if you have, a complex, which is a group of prairie dog colonies in one area that's connected, within a mile or 2 or 10 to another area, then you can get some cool metapopulation exchange with ferrets. Here, You know, one of the recovery goals is 30 populations from Canada to Mexico, you know, basically throughout the ferret range, 30 or more populations across the range. Each of those populations need to have at least 30 adults. 10 of those 30 need to have 100 breeding adults. We are not at 100 breeding adults anywhere. We probably got close, or did get close, in the South Dakota area. There's this really phenomenal, most biologically rich site called the Kanata Basin Badlands National Park, Black-footed ferret recovery site. They had at one point in time like 30,000 acres of prairie dogs and almost 300 ferrets. And that was back before plague jumped into South Dakota back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. And they had ferrets coming out their ears. It was the heyday. We had actually 1,000 ferrets in the wild thanks to that site at that point in time. And there's a couple other sites that were really great at contributing to that too. Yeah, and then plague comes and it just really kind of keeps the damper on thing. And then you add drought. Like, you can do all the right things for this species in terms of like monitoring and protection and having enough money and enough people. And then the rain doesn't come. It's so tricky. Like, you are looking at starving prairie dogs and starving ferrets. So now what? Right. So we are really looking at like A, not losing hope, and B, just like, surely we can have enough Christmas lights on the tree blinking on at the same time, so that if one population is struggling, we at least have these other 25 or 35 or 45 or whatever it is that are doing well.
And
yeah.
so those sites that we lost, that's due to these environmental factors coming in, like plague or drought. That's just collapsing either the prairie dog populations first, which then leads to the ferrets, or actually taking out the ferrets themselves too.
Yeah, so when if prairie dogs don't live from plague, like if a plague event happens, it either comes in an epizootic fashion and kills everything in a couple of weeks, or it simmers in an enzootic fashion and just keeps like prairie dog populations low. So you can have prairie dogs protected from plague, and typically that keeps ferrets alive. And even if ferrets aren't vaccinated, if prairie dogs are protected, you have a good chance at ferrets recovering and staying alive. But if neither are protected, that's really bad. So ferrets can die from being bitten by an infected flea. They can die by eating an infected prairie dog, or they can die from starvation. So it's a, double-edged sword. So it is hard to be a ferret unless you've got a site that's plague-free, and we work really hard to do that. And in the sites where those pieces line up, they do well. But you have to have a lot of habitat, and you have to have a lot of money, and you have to have a lot of hope. And with hope, there is the potential for us to get there, but we have more hurdles to clear for sure.
Now, Kristy, you mentioned that the site that did really well was in South Dakota, which is where you started. It just so happens that that's where you were.
Yeah.
When you got to that site, when Ted Turner's like, I need black-footed ferrets on this property, I want Kristy to come join. What do you do to start? Right? Like, there was already a site there, but like, what does one do when starting to work on this, when you're given that project, and why was that site successful? Like, what was it, before the plague came, that you were able to turn around and have 1,000 out there at that particular site? Because Kristy, like, given everything you've told us, right, that is huge. Like, that's what gives you hope, right? Is that people like you are doing this, and you tell us like, hey, yeah, we got it to 1,000. They're like, okay, this is why I believe in this project, right? Because people like you. What did you do to be like? How was that journey? What was done? How was done? Please walk us through.
I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, when I stepped foot on land in South Dakota, and there weren't a lot of prairie dogs there. So, we spent a lot of time walking and driving ATVs around to look for prairie dog habitat and what was possible, what was there historically. A lot of those prairie dog colonies had been poisoned out over time. Again, in South Dakota in the early 2000s, when I was there, it was pre-plague. Plague had not hit that area. So it is like ferret heaven. You can grow prairie dogs so fast there. So I started out as, I call myself a prairie dog farmer, so in South Dakota, if any of you have been to Badlands National Park, you'll know that there's, there's Badlands National Park and the adjacent national grassland. And that's those two sites combined. They're actually two individual reintroduction sites that grew together, and now they're one big site. But there are boundaries in South Dakota along the Badlands National Park or the Forest Service boundary with private landowners who didn't want prairie dogs, right? So what I did in South Dakota on this private ranch was to build nest boxes. I had to learn, A, I had to learn about prairie dogs. B, I had to call my colleague down in New Mexico and be like, how do I build these nest box things? Then I had to learn how to drive like an auger and a ditch witch. And I was out picking out reintroduction sites for prairie dogs based on historical occupancy. And so I learned a ton about what that all looks like and what good habitat is. And then I'm literally physically building burrows, with these like above ground cages and these black drain tubes that go way down into the ground with a nest box underneath. And I'm backfilling it all, and then I'm putting an above ground cage on it. And then I am driving, 3 hours to Badlands National Park, and I'm picking up 300 prairie dogs in these cages that I suspend from a ceiling, and I quarantine them for 2 weeks, and I feed them for 2 weeks, and then I put them out into the wild and hope they survive. So it was a trip, right? And like, can I just tell you a really funny story? So in South Dakota, where I was living, Ted Turner wasn't very popular. People like me as biologists weren't very popular. And prairie dogs definitely weren't popular. So it's like 9 o'clock at night. I've got 300 prairie dogs in the back of my truck, and I have all these nest boxes, and I maybe only had 100 prairie dogs. And I was trying to get these prairie dogs out into this translocation site. And it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm chasing daylight. I got an hour daylight left. I'm like, okay, I gotta get these guys in. And driving down the road, screaming in his truck, bringing all the dust behind him is this local rancher. And he screams up and he pulls in, and all the dust is flying in my face. And he's like, gets out of his truck and he slams the door, and he's like, what in the cry-tell are you doing with all these prairie dogs? And I was like, oh boy, okay. Hello, my name's Kristy. What's your name? I hate prairie dogs. What are you doing? This is. And I was like, okay, wait, excuse me, sir. I would love to hear all about your thoughts. I would love to learn your name. And I have an hour of daylight, and I have a lot of work to do. So I'd be happy to meet you for coffee. I'd be happy to meet you after I'm done, or you can help me. And he stops, and he's like, puts his hands on his hips, and he's like, oh, heck, I'll help you. And that was Philip Matthews. And he was my first ranching friend, and he got out of his truck and he helped me put these prairie dogs in. And then he would drive up and down the road and be like, those prairie dogs are doing pretty well. He's like, I hate these prairie dogs. And I was like, well, yeah, you don't have to like them on your lands, but Ted Turner likes them, and we're going to grow them here, and we're going to put ferrets back. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that story, but I think, it just shows that ferret recovery is complex, and it's more about relationships and having good habitat and being far more than just a biologist. Like, you really have to be innovative, and our ferret recovery team is probably some of the coolest, most connected, innovative people I know. You have to, be willing to work together, find common ground, find the places where these prairie dogs and ferrets can be, and give it all you've got.
I love that story, right? Like it sets you up with like someone just showing up out of nowhere, as you've got like this almost a cartoon scenario of how many ferrets that you're driving along with, and be like, look here, lady, I don't like these things. And I just love that you don't have to like them, right? It's okay. When I'm not bringing it to your life, and the fact that you gave him these options and he helped you, like, that is really, really cool. That at the end of the day, he was like, fine, all right, I'll help. Did you tell him about like the ferrets and why that's like, were you able to, just like do the education part of things, right? And be like, this is why they're important to the ecosystem. Like, at the end of it, was he ever like, well, I kind of like the ferrets? Like, did you get him on side at that point, or even just being neutral towards
He
all
was neutral, and I think he became one of my first friends in South Dakota, and certainly my first ranching friend. And I learned a lot from him too, because I was like, well, show me your prairie dogs. Tell me about why this is challenging. Like, I want to know what it is that drives ranchers crazy about prairie dogs. Like, talk to me about what this means for your livelihood, for how does it impact you raising cows? How does it impact your business and your ability to raise more beef, right? Like, what does that look like for you? What are the tools that you are using to manage prairie dogs in a way that's, not dumping lead into the ecosystem and killing eagles and hawks, and anything else eating carcasses full of lead? Are using poison that's then, a toxicant that's killing all sorts of unintended things too. Like, talk to me about how you're managing them, because I think as much as conservation is really important about prairie dogs, the reality is they can't be everywhere, unfortunately, right? For the ferrets, unfortunately. And so you have to have tools that you can humanely manage. So we do a lot of bly trapping and removing prairie dogs from boundaries, like we did in South Dakota, where we took them, instead of killing those prairie dogs, we took them and we started a new ferret site with them. And that's an option. Mr. Matthews used recreational shooting, and he had outfitters that people drive in from all over the country and world to kill prairie dogs. And he was making $200 a day, per guide on that, right? And so, like, that, he learned how to make a buck off that, right, wrong, or otherwise. That was his deal, right? So when we started having concerns about prairie dogs moving from private lands into other private lands that didn't want them, I was really cognizant of, like, okay, we don't want to have to kill prairie dogs that I just started growing. So how do we prevent them? In South Dakota, we were able to grow tall grass and put up these barriers to prevent, cattle and bison from grazing them, so prairie dogs wouldn't go through them. And so, there's a lot of cool things you can do. But, I think it's all about relationships. And, like, isn't everything in life about relationships? Like, relationships before transactions. And yeah, in order to be a good ferret biologist, you have to be able to be good with people.
I love that attitude, Kristy, because it's one of those where I'm going to engage in this discourse. I'm going to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to actively try to learn from you, right? And it's making that two-way street of, it's like, okay, well, you listen to me and my complaints. All right, I guess tell me about these prairie dogs and, like, in your truck, and tell me, why the ferrets are important. And that's how you start these fundamental connections. And it's just, for you, right, the even bigger complicated thing is you've got to do this with someone who's on side, right, who's Ted Turner, but then you have to do it with the ranchers, and then there's also native peoples and public land. Like, each one of those is going to be a different approach too. So Kristy, you're not just a ferret biologist, you're also a maker and crafter, right? Of, like, building these, like, incredibly intricate nests, right? You're the field scientist collecting the data off it. You're an animal rehabilitator, right? And amongst so many other hats that you're wearing, it seems really overwhelming, but you're here leading the conservation charge, which is incredible. That,
So nice.
like, just a testament to you, Kristy, is pretty much what I'm getting at here.
That's really nice. It's
Fox just
teamwork
subscribed
makes
for
the dream
4
work. I didn't
months.
get here alone. And I've been lucky enough to be here long enough, doing a lot of, wearing many different hats and many different things, and I don't have to be an expert in everything. And now one of the great things is to be able to share what I know with others, like this young man, Tevin Meserly, from Fort Belknap. I'm sharing with him everything I know about how to manage a ferret site, and now he's training interns and managing those things himself too. And so I feel like it's just full circle, right? Like, what comes around goes around. I've been really lucky to be mentored by phenomenal people and have doors open and opportunities shared with me that allowed me to get where I am and learn about everything that I have and have the opportunities to innovate and grow. And working for World Wildlife Fund has been really phenomenal that way, because if I can dream it, we can do it, right? Like, and it's not just me. Like, I keep coming back to this innovation piece, because this ferret recovery team, it's huge. People are so into creating solutions that last for ferret recovery. And whether you're driven because you don't want to be awake all night and so you want to find some other technology, or whether you're sick of fundraising or you can't find enough money and you want to make cheaper baits for prairie dogs so that we can keep them free of plague, like it's pretty incredible. And I feel like what's really cool is to see like some of the innovations come to fruition now. Like, let's talk about cloning for a second. Like the scientific material that got captured from ferrets back in Meeteetse, Wyoming in 1985 to 87 got frozen, right? And so then there's this cool ferret named Willa who never reproduced in the wild, but her cell line is frozen. And, we have 7 genetic founders. And so come along with Revive and Restore and some really other cool people partnering with Fish and Wildlife Service. And they're like, oh, yeah, let's make the first U.S. endangered species clone using the cell line of Willa, who was alive in 1985, 1987 timeframe. Like, good grief, how cool is that? So you take these, you use all this cool technology and you use a surrogate domestic ferret and you clone the first ferret, and oh my word, now, 15 clones later, we have an eighth genetic line, which is maximizing, this is increasing genetic diversity 3 times on average from what we have now. Cool stuff. And if you can't get excited about this, I don't know who.
Yeah, I don't. You might not be a fan of science. It's mind-boggling, like how you're saying, right? You get to bring back an animal that's been dead for, 40 years. All of a sudden, it's back now. It's introducing its genetic diversity into the population, and that's an element of restoration. I have a difficult question for you when it comes to species. So, right, we mentioned that it's a surrogate line that we place the black-footed ferret embryo with, and that then has a different, the nuclear genome is the same, but the mitochondrial genome is coming from the domestic ferret. When you're speaking in terms of conservation and those numbers, is the cloned ferret with mitochondrial genome from domestic ferrets still considered a black-footed ferret? And where is that delineation when it comes to the conservation definition of black-footed ferret? I get that that's a crazy difficult question, but how do you as the conservationist decide? Like, what is black-footed ferret enough, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have the precise answer for you because I'm not a geneticist. So like my colleagues at Revive and Restore could answer that question. And I think that, we are not really, we're not releasing those animals right now. The goal right now is to maximize that cell line to really tap out what genetic diversity we can add to the current captive population. And now, those clones are going to be bred with pure black-footed ferrets. So I don't know, again, I'm not a geneticist. I don't know at what generation you can like weed out that mitochondrial domestic ferret DNA. It's such a great question that I don't have a great answer to. I do think that we were at a place where we had to try something different. And this has presented the ability to kind of break through a little bit of a genetic bottleneck, which shockingly, with only 7 founders, we have had very little challenges, right? Like there's been some really cool research done, biomedical research on how to, not only artificially inseminate ferrets, but also to fix crooked tails and crooked sperm and all the things, right? So like this provides just a bigger opportunity that we didn't have before. Your question is a very good one, and I think one for ethics, because a lot of things we talk about too is like, well, should we release a clone? Or what is the status? What is the tolerance for clones? If we genetically modify prairie dogs to be free of plague, is that acceptable? So I think us as a society, we have to think about that. You hear about like, oh, are we going to bring back dire wolves and woolly mammoths? It's like, should we? Could we? We can. We have the technology to, and it's darn cool. Like, I don't know. I feel like genetic innovation is just mind-bogglingly cool. And maybe you can answer this question about what's a ferret better than I can in terms of that background that you have. But I feel like that we are in a place that provides us with more tools than we had before, and that advancing our ability to create more robust cell line that enables us to reach recovery. It's a good thing to be exploring. Whether those animals ever get integrated into the wild population, whole nother story, whole nother question. No one's made decisions about that yet.
I feel like I can't answer it either. I feel like it's one of those where it's like you are like the scientist is making this decision because like species definition are already so squishy anyway. And it's just really cool to hear, what y'all as the conservationists on the field think. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer either way. It's really when you're left to save the species, and this is a way we can introduce genetic diversity. And if it's coming at the price of some mitochondrial DNA, you could make the argument that, it's worth it because you'll save the species at the end of the day. And it really, it just, I think, comes down to, again, no real right answer, just getting into what we can and should do, which like we talked about at the very beginning. How do you decide to bring in those 20 black-footed ferrets and then have that 7 breeding population from there? Like, again, it feels like the impossible decision to make,
right? And then how do you, like, a lot of questions we get, it's like, well, if plague is such a big deal, why are we bothering? Why are we spending all this money to keep this little slinky-sized ferret alive? And it's like, well, do you want it on your conscience and your generation to let this go extinct under your watch when you can do something about it? Some people would say yes. I'm not there.
I like that. Is there when you're pitching this for grants or for someone who maybe isn't taken with the answer of, I want to help save an animal, what kind of argument does one make? Like in terms of, is there like an ecosystem food chain style argument? Is there right, when you're trying to get the naysayer on the side where it's just not enough to just talk about the inherent want to save an animal, where do you usually pivot in making that argument?
I come to people because a lot of people, and I think the challenge with ferrets over things like bison, we have a lot of people who just love bison because you can see them, you can eat them, and they have this huge cultural connection to our history, right? Like, right, wrong, or otherwise, like they were a huge part of Native American history. So people-wise, bringing back black-footed ferrets restores something in all of us too, not just Native nations, not just Native peoples, but also us as humans. Like, we are part of this ecosystem. We were part of the species decline. We have a chance to do something about it. And look at this, the motivation from these site managers who care about the species, and by bringing them back brings not just cultural significance and full circle family return to their native lands or their public lands or whatever, it also restores this prairie ecosystem. The prairie dice that I talked about earlier, you can't have a complete prairie ecosystem without the complement of predators in it. And bringing back this predator kind of, and ferrets do help balance the prairie dog populations enough to keep landowners who don't like prairie dogs happy? No, because they're not going to eat themselves out of house and home, right? And ferrets reproduce well, but not enough, and the numbers are so low, but I feel like they are this intricate part of the ecosystem, and by having them here, it's a full complement. And if that's not enough for you, hopefully your concern and care about people who were also like Native nations, Native peoples who were displaced alongside bison, alongside ferrets, alongside prairie dogs and other wildlife, for them to all come back together and have space and learn, and the next generations can have their own relationship with these species. Like, kind of gives me like goosebumps to think about that stuff, right? Like, but it is a little bit like playing God in some ways. Like, who are we to say the species needs to stay here, or to breed them or not, to bring in clones or not, to release them or not? Yeah, and I think there's just enough of us out there that it's just a worthwhile journey.
I can't think of a better person than you leading this because, Kristy, as we're chatting, like, honestly, each one of the conservationists that we've talked with from WDEF feel like superheroes. Like the amount of stuff that y'all have to do to make this successful is so understated in the public. Like, I see an icon for a cool panda, and my wife and I, when we started dating 15 years ago, was the first charity that we donated to together. First Valentine's gift she wanted was a WWF flamingo, right? But y'all's stories of what you do is so not heard by folks. And it's just like, Kristy, just you, right? All that you have done to help save this species, I think, is the inspiring thing that will get people out there to be like, you know what? If someone believes this much that this animal needs to be saved, and the amount that you personally have done, I hope that gets people on the side and when they hear your story, because I find y'all so inspirational. Like, I want to go out and just, I want to fight for the black-footed ferret. I want to just punch Plague in the face. And I get it doesn't work that way, but gosh darn it all. Like, this is what I think is going to make that meaningful change. Could you tell us some, Kristy, about some of the stories that give you hope? You mentioned that was a really important element to all of this. And it would be very easy, and you would not be wronged to have it hard to have hope. What kind of stories from your work give you that hope? And, if you were to tell the audience at home, like a couple of stories that are like, you know what, this instance that I looked at, this gives me that motivation to keep going.
Great question. And I have to say, it's so nice of you to acknowledge, the efforts. And I'm going to say again, it is not me alone. Like, I am surrounded by some of the most phenomenal people, within WWF and outside of WWF. And it's been an honor of my life to have this job and do this work. And it is hard to maintain hope sometimes, when like we hit almost 500 ferrets in the wild in 2024. Pretty darn exciting. We hadn't been at that number for a number of years. We kind of been hovering around 300, 400, and then we had a really banner year in 2024, and several populations of ferrets grew. And then in fall or winter and spring of 2025, the rains didn't come, and we had plague, we had drought, and we lost, over 100 ferrets, and now we're down to under 300. And it's like, oh my gosh, we are doing everything we possibly can with the money we have. Some sites are doing everything, and you can't make the rainfall. And so there are times where I have to pick myself up and be like, okay, channel your inner Jane Goodall hope. Because you know what? If people like me don't stand up and keep trying, like, what does that mean? Like, we all have to dust off and keep going and figure it out. Maybe we need to start harnessing water and putting out irrigation systems. Maybe we need to feed prairie dogs. I mean, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I feel like for me, there's a couple of things that really wake me, when I get up every morning and I think about why I show up to work and why I do what I do. There's a lot that goes into that. One, I just really believe in this work. And I think that it's people that I work with who show up, like my friend Travis. He works for Prairie Wildlife Research. He traps, 200 or more ferrets every year. So he goes 100% nocturnal from July through October, trapping ferrets. It's like, wow. I am not that great of a night owl. Like, that's pretty impressive. So that gives me hope. Then, the nights I am out helping and monitoring and trapping ferrets, then it's, wow, the stars are out. I'm watching the northern lights. The coyotes are yipping. There's ferrets running around everywhere. I'm tracking a ferret right now. And oh my gosh, this ferret won't stop jumping around. And I got to make sure I keep my eyes on it so I can find it. And so now that stupid little bugger finally stops, and I jump out of my truck with a trap and I run to the burrow and I put this trap in the burrow, and all of a sudden this prairie dog is coming out. Ah, 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 and I'm like jumping back with my trap, and attached to that prairie dog is a ferret. And I'm like, I am watching a live ferret kill a prairie dog in lifetime, and this usually only happens underground, or you can see it in captivity if you're lucky. But like, this was like probably one of the most craziest events I've ever witnessed. And it's like, this ferret weighs as much as this prairie dog, and it is sitting here killing a ferret, and this is what it's born to do, and it's doing its job. And while I kind of wanted to save the prairie dog at the same time, like I was like, okay, wait, this is the way this goes. And I didn't end up catching that prairie dog or that ferret because it was full and it wasn't coming out of that burrow anytime soon. So that gives me hope that you can take a captive animal or even a wild animal that was born in the wild, and it is doing what it is meant to do, killing prairie dogs and surviving and reproducing. My other piece of hope comes back to this biologist, Tevin Meserly. He is a member of the Fort Belknap Indian community in northern Montana. He went to a tribal college in his community. At first, there was only a 2-year degree program, and it didn't have any wildlife or any kind of natural ecology or wildlife biology or anything like that. The program director at that college and the president and a group of people decided to create a 4-year degree program. They created what's called Aani Nakota ecology, which are the 2 tribes at Fort Belknap. So there's a 4-year degree program and a 2-year degree program now in Native American ecology for Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. And there was a big grant that came down to create this Buffalo Center that enables students to go through school and have internships about wildlife in their own backyard and get credit for the work that they're doing and help contribute to some of the recovery goals of whatever species are on that landscape. So Tevin was one of the first graduates from the 4-year degree program in Aani Nakota ecology. As an intern, before he graduated, he worked on the Ferret project at Fort Belknap, which I was lucky enough to be invited to help start in 2012. And so, I met him then, and he learned how to do a lot of the ferret trapping and ferret monitoring and prairie dog monitoring. Then he graduated with honors and became a technician working as, working on the ferret and prairie dog and swift fox and other programs. His first year post-graduation under a biologist was there, and then that biologist retired. Tevin gets hired on as only the third biologist to ever work at Fort Belknap. He's, green and fresh out of school, but it's his community. He's now the face of it. And I have been lucky enough to work with him to help him learn everything he needs to know. And as I said earlier, he's now training that next gen of students, the interns that come. He's giving field tours, he's taking donors out, he's in movies, and he's writing grants. He's now writing wildlife recovery plans for ferrets, and he just took his first flights looking for ungulates. So like this next generation of biologists who are ready to be at a site. Like, I'm at a place where I don't manage just one site. We're a wildlife fund, we don't own land. So I'm supporting sites who want the help, and I have to be in a lot of places. But Tevin gets to live, eat, and breathe the daily nuances, the daily fluctuations, the seasonal everything. And he gets to lead the show. And now I get to show up and just help him out. And it's so cool. So that gives me hope, right? And then, like, I don't know, then the fact that, like, okay, well, I am not in the field 100% of the time anymore, and we have this huge need to fundraise, right? I'm not a fundraiser. I'm great at spreadsheets, and I like to calculate stuff. I know what it costs. So I am going to become a conservation finance person next. So it's like, there's so much you can do, right? There's so much you can create, and there's so much you can give. And like, my journey as a ferret biologist can go on forever. I can get into research, I can get, whatever I dream I can do. And that's just so inspiring and cool. And all of it counts, and collectively with other people like me, we're trying to make some headway.
I love that story that the inspiration, right, is coming from that educational value that's passing on to like the next set of researchers. And just to highlight for those, who are listening at this part of the show, that next set of research, it definitely sounds like too, would not be there without you having built that foundation, which is another just super cool part to have one of the pioneers, if you will, of black-footed ferret conservation on with us today, and then you're building the next generation to it. It's so inspirational, like really it is, Kristy. Like I would
It's
hope
fun.
that there are many
It's
people
fun.
at home like just listening and looking up to you as a scientist and also just a woman in STEM. Like, you are someone who should be like put up and just be like, this is the person that I want my daughter to be like, because it's truly amazing.
It's super rewarding. It's super fun. And, again, like I am a product of the generation before me. And these guys are still out there doing cool stuff, right? Like I get to work with Dean Biggins and Steve Forrest, and those guys were there at Matiti in the 80s. They were in their 20s at the time and doing really cool things. I'm still working with those guys now on how we get to recovery, right? And like I'm just sharing what I know and paying it forward. And I think we all have a responsibility to do that. Share what you know and give somebody else a leg up. You know, there's so much to learn and do, and nobody can achieve it alone.
I love that. Kristy, do you have time for us to look at some of the images and the videos that you
Yes,
sent over?
yes, I've
Awesome.
been dying. Yeah. If you
I have
we
the
have a couple of videos. We have a 3-minute video that could be cool to show kind of what some of the ferret spotlighting looks like. I also would love to have you show, oh, I think I only sent you the PDF.
I have the
I'd love to
yeah,
show
so I
some of
have the
the thermal
PDF.
drone stuff.
Mhm. I
I've
have a
got just
PDF with
this,
no videos in it.
yeah.
Um, is there
If I can share my screen, I can show you the thermal camera, the drone with the ferret. If
let's
screen sharing is
see.
an option. Otherwise, I have two
Oh,
videos.
I got it. I got it in the form of a link from Rose. Let me just grab it now.
Sweet.
Let's see.
Yeah, and let me see if I can actually, because this thermal thing is on my hard drive, so I don't think it's a link that I can share. If you put your email in the chat, I can send this to you too.
Awesome. I think I might have it here. It's one of those, multiply protected things, right? That you have to
Yes, 100%.
make sure everything's clean. Just want to make sure I have the right folder. I had all the images squared away and I forgot that the videos were links and not embedded in. But we've got that one. Almost.
So the one video that has like the YouTube Partners Protecting the Mass Bandit of the Prairie. Um, that's 3 minutes and 29 seconds. We can play portions of that. And it doesn't have a ton of the thermal stuff in, but the other link that you should share or play at some point in time is the Wild Hope video, because that shows everything about, like the history of ferret recovery to present day. And I can throw that link in the chat too. That's 17, 18 minutes, so that's not something you probably want to do now, but
Let me throw. I'll send you the email right now.
okay. And I might have to see if this will. Thanks for being patient, everybody. Yeah, and I can figure out how to, if we want to show this one video, I can throw this in the link real quick, in the chat real quick, to show some of the spotlighting and everything while we're waiting for me to get this to you, because I can't talk and do this at the same
Oh,
time.
no, we got it. Rose was on it.
Thanks, Rose.
See.
Probably doesn't have the link to the thermal camera stuff though, so I'm going to try to get that sent over as a separate slide for you that you can play live embedded in this PowerPoint. So let me do that for you while we're.
Yeah, we've got that one. Thank you, Rose. Rose, you guys on top of it. See, let's load this guy up. So I've got the wild episode and I have the YouTube video, Kristy. Do you have a
Yeah, the
preference on
YouTube.
which one?
Yeah, the wild is awesome, but that one's a 17-minute one. So I do strongly recommend everybody watch that. We can do that now or later, offline, whatever you guys want to do. That other one, the YouTube, is 3 minutes and 29 seconds. So that might be a good place to start.
Okay, so we've got.
And it's got good volume, so you might want to make sure your volume's good.
The black-footed ferret is one of the most endangered mammals in North America.
Yeah,
and there are
you can
only
pull up for that.
Do you want it with the audio, Kristy? I can also mute it.
Yeah, I think the audio is fun if you are tolerant.
Oh, it's your call. You're our guest. Whatever you would like.
Do the audio.
Okay.
It's super fun.
about 3.
Because it tells the story, and this will show. What I didn't get into was some of the first plague protecting baits that we did for prairie dogs had a vaccine in them. That turned out not to be as effective as the fipronil laced baits. So in this video, you'll see a little bit more of the vaccine laced baits, but same concept. So yeah, if you have the ability to play audio, it's cool.
We got it. I don't know if you'll hear it, but the audio is being piped out for everyone as well.
190 in the wild today. Black-footed ferrets are not only biologically important, but culturally important to the tribes of Fort Belknap. And bringing this animal back is like bringing a relative home for them. It's an incredible honor to be working with the tribes of Fort Belknap to return this endangered species to the prairie. It's very special because it hosts one of 14 ferret populations in North America, and it is the first Native Nation-led ferret population. So here, this animal relative holds high significance to them.
When I was out here firsthand kind of experiencing it, just realizing how delicate they are and how dependent they are on us and organizations like this. And they mean bringing back the vitality of my land and my tribal animals that we have here. It felt really close to my heart, and it's really rewarding for me.
The primary threat to the black-footed ferret is a non-native disease called sylvatic plague. And in order for us to establish and maintain populations of this endangered species, it's important for us to vaccinate them against this deadly disease. We live trap them from their burrows. We transport them to...
Kristy, this image here where you're doing the live trapping, this is kind of what I imagine what happened when the prairie dog jumped out. Was this the kind of trap that you were doing?
Yeah, exactly, the trap. Although I did not have time to get the ring reader box, so that orange box is a reader, and then we put that lollipop up so that we can come back and find that burrow visually and in addition to a GPS site or location. But yeah.
I had to point that. I love that story so much. I just had to be like, this was the image, right? That kind of you were dealing with. Nice.
Oh, I totally screamed. Yeah. I was like, ah! I mean, and
we transport them to...
And it was kind of back and forth, too. It took the ferret a little while to kill it, but it was intense. My heart was pounding it. I had to stand there for a little while to absorb what I actually witnessed.
You were like, yeah, he wasn't coming out afterwards.
No,
he was fed. He was good to go.
Like hanging out down below after eating a pint of ice cream, Okay, I've got a couple
where we vaccinate them against this deadly disease
that I'm sending over.
And it's neat to see the vaccination too taking place in this video. Like you said, is it a face shield that we've got here on them, or they're actually like anesthetized?
So we put them under using isoflurane, and so that's an oxygen mask there that kind of keeps them sleepy until all that stuff's over.
Cool. And then the 2 injections, probably for the 2 different vaccines that you do, and then you'd have the secondary one for the plague later on.
Yep. So canine distemper and plague for this first time, plus, and this is probably a microchip that's going in right now. Looks like.
It's so cool to see the behind the scenes and have you explain it to us. Cause it's like, man, you never would get this otherwise, right? It's really, really cool.
It's pretty fun. And it's, that's the thing too, this, the F1V vaccine, the black-footed ferret vaccine, that was also like developed, it was like a raccoon virus, raccoon Yeah, it was a virus to prevent raccoon, or the raccoon pox virus. What is that? I forget now. But anyway, that got changed and used for ferrets. So there's just like so much stuff that's been evolved to be able to protect ferrets from plague and everything else. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, and then we always put them back in their home burrow.
Return them to the wild.
And I am putting
We
this,
must look for them
video.
at night because they are nocturnal species.
So
We
I'm
do
sending you
that
2 slides that are it's thermal video footage embedded in a PowerPoint slide that you can open up, hopefully.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll grab that once we finish up this video. We just saw the release take place, and
Nice.
then the ferret popping up and saying hello.
They're so cool, you know, and they're really cool because they'll come up and periscope. You know, they come out of the burrow and they're like, "Mm." And they do these cool dances and they mark territory, and they're rowdy. They're also really fun. Like, I came up to this one kit last year. I spent 5 nights trying to catch this little stinker, and like he'd come out of the burrow and look at me, chatter at me, and I'd be like, just go into the trap. I'm gonna put this here. Please come back out. And he was like, no. So yeah, I actually didn't end up catching that one. And we don't use anything. We don't bait the traps. I actually talked to a colleague of mine who catches a lot of stray dogs, and he catches all sorts of animals. He's like, just use like a red blinking light. And it's funny because we never lure. We just those traps are long and tubular, and it's an extension of the prairie dog burrow. We wrap it not only to keep like that tunnel vision going, but also for warmth from the wind and weather. But just super cool. And these guys, you can sort of see a little bit of the emerald green eye shine here.
Do you not bait just because they're naturally curious enough where they will just go and explore and you don't need to coax them in?
Yes, and you know, if you've got swift fox, coyotes, badgers, anything else around, you just don't want to be attracting them to where the ferrets are, because they'll kill them. So we don't want to be luring predators in that will kill what we're trying to save. And there are some sites, you know, there's one really cool private site in Colorado that it's like a swift fox haven, and coyotes and badgers and ferrets just get munched left and right there. And so, you know, we're trying to figure out what that looks like and how to deal with it. And there's some really, you know, in the very early days too, there was one of the sites in Montana had a lot of coyotes, and so there was some predator exclusion fencing around some of the areas to, you know, increase ferret survival post-release. There's also been this robo badger where they took like this stuffed badger carcass and put it on a motorized like thing to run across the prairie to get, you know, ferrets and prairie dogs to, you know, ferrets to look at that and go down, you know. So a lot of training to like encourage them to run and hide and not be the next Scooby snack for a predator.
It's like you mentioned that so many innovations need to take place to make this successful. Yeah. And I love the again, the image now of a robot badger also like being chased by them.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Yeah, and just cool. Like, you know, we try a lot of things just to keep ferrets alive, keep everything going.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the view from a spotlight. Like, you know, this you got your truck headlights and the spotlight here, and we're scanning. And what we're doing is we're looking at the tops of these prairie dogs. You see mounds. Well, yeah, you'll just see my face here, but the mounds of a prairie dog, you can kind of see them off to the right here. They look like little moons, mm-hmm. you know, or like little people call them landscape lunar things, right? If you think about the moon and you think about all the pockets, prairie dog burrows kind of look like that at night. So we're looking at the tops of these burrows for a ferret to come out.
It's you yourself have to have like a search image trained in your head, right? Of like what you're looking for, because I don't think the regular person is gonna ID what the heck this is, right? No. In this amount of darkness, like. No,
it's crazy. And like, what's cool and what's a little bit wild, like you're driving and you're holding a spotlight and you're looking, and so it's just kind of like but you do get really good at it. If anyone is a berry picker who's gone out and picked strawberries or huckleberries or blueberries or raspberries, whatever, your search image gets really strong after you've been picking for a couple hours. Like, And then anytime you walk by a strawberry patch or a huckleberry bush or whatever you're picking, your eyes are constantly going to that. And it's very easy to fine tune that search image. One of the first times when I went spotlighting, I was with my friend Travis. We were on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, and it was back in like 2005, maybe. And he's like really frantic. He like takes that spotlight and he's like, and I'm like, whoa, like my eyes can't go that fast. And he's like, there's a parrot, there's a parrot, there's a parrot. And I'm like, whoa, and like he'd been at it a few more years than I had at that point in time. And so I felt like such a dunce at first, but you pick it up really fast. And then, some people just come in, like we host a lot of people, Kevin and others that are really great at like bringing people out, giving people an experience to have this hands-on experience to see one of very few ferrets in the wild. And some people pick it up really easily, like especially we'll put spotlights on the back seat of a truck so that people in the back can watch, or people in the passenger side can be looking too, because otherwise it's really hard to stay awake all night driving around in a truck. And some people pick it up really quick. It's pretty fun.
Is there like an ecotourism business for this? Like if you went to South Dakota or somewhere in the plains, like is there some kind of financial incentive that you could pay to be like, I want to see one in the wild, or is it not really the market for it yet?
We haven't gotten there. That's one thing that we need to get better at as ferret biologists is like, how do we make ferrets pay? Like it's hard. Not everybody wants to be awake at night, in the middle of the night and in a truck. What we do have a lot of experience with, and this is actually another fun story. I have two more stories of hope that speak to giving people the experience to see ferrets. So the answer to your question is no, there's no market for ecotourism yet, partly because ferret sites are far from many airports and many towns with amenities like lodging and food. And so it's hard. It takes a long time to get to some of these sites. Arizona had, the Chamber of Commerce did bring people in, give out spotlights and do a little bit of spotlighting. And that brought revenue to that little town of Sedona at one point in time, or maybe not little town, but, and I think we should probably get better at that. We're also dealing with an endangered species and there's some delicacies there, but, one thing that was really cool, so when we release ferrets, either if it's a new site that's getting ferrets for the first time, or if we're augmenting a population, meaning, the population is doing well, but we could add a little bit more animal. If we add 10 more animals, we could get, a better population boon, mix up a little genetic diversity, have more kits. So a lot of times those releases happen in the late afternoon, early evening during daytime. And so bringing people out to have a ceremony to welcome animals back to this land and be able to release a ferret is very game-changing for a lot of people. So one cool partnership that we have is with the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services, whose main jobs are to eliminate animals that are problems. And as Noelle talked about, prairie dogs are often considered a pest, a vertebrate pest, and a lot of places people want them poisoned or removed. Well, we hired Wildlife Services to help protect prairie dogs from plague because they come with all the gear, all the training, all the permits, to handle insecticides and pesticides and all the things. So they've been like great partners in like keeping prairie dogs alive at a handful of sites. And it's a challenging job to be out in 110-degree heat, driving your ATV burrow to burrow and putting dust down it, and like the mosquitoes are out, you're sweating because you're covered in clothing because you don't want fleas to be jumping around, or you don't want to be sunburned, and blah 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 blah. You're out there for 12 hours a day, and you're riding an ATV and your arm is dying because you're holding this wand all day long, and it can be really just mentally taxing. So at the end of this one summer, when this Wildlife Services team had finished helping to protect prairie dogs from plague at Fort Belknap, we invited them to the ferret release. And we let the head guy and his folks release ferrets. And I got probably one of the nicest notes after that he said, I've been eliminating animals for many years of my life, and to be able to be a part of this, to return this endangered species to the land, and to know that I had a small role in it, has changed my outlook on life. And so it's like you can really change how people feel about a species or an event or anything simply by having exposure and experience directly. And that was a huge thing. Another really fun example is one of the recent augmentations that we had at Fort Belknap was, we brought 20 animals back. And I think it's really important to connect communities, whether it's private lands, public lands, state lands, whatever, tribal lands, is to make the release of a black-footed ferret an educational opportunity for the community, because the 99.9% of the community is not going to come out at night and do this work unless you're a student at Ani Nakota College in the ecology program. And we had 60 people ages 4 to 84 at this ferret release site 2 years ago at Fort Belknap, and the kids were gathered around, and the ferret comes out, and the ferret turns around and chatters at them, and they all go woo, and those kids, hopefully a couple of them are going to remember that for their whole entire life. And I hope when they're old enough, they can tell that story and bring their kids to the next release, or whatever it looks like, but just kind of cool.
I can't tell you the endorphin rush I just got from you telling that story, because the way you also lit up telling that tale, like it just had that effect on me. Like I'm getting like the tingles, right? Of like the impact that has something like that, right? Of being able to see that in real time. And like you mentioned, there's both like the ranchers involved and the native peoples on the land too, from the cultural significance that you're adding back. And again, ages 4 to 84.
Cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mind blowing. Generations of people who now have a story about ferrets on their lands. Does it get much better? I don't know. Pretty cool.
I mean, it gets better if we hit 3,000.
Yes.
That's where it's gonna get better. That's where
I hope I'm not 84 before we get there, but we'll find out.
Kristy, do you want me to switch gears to the thermosensor?
Yeah. Were you able to access those 2 slides? And you should be able to just open a slide and click on the video.
Cool. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. This is the cool part. I feel like most people really love the thermal camera stuff. And one is of a 9-minute, thing, or it's a longer lasting one. If you want to pull up the pink one first, that's the thermal drone finding ferrets. And then the other one we can just let play in the background after I tell you what minute to go to, if that works for you.
So Kristy, it doesn't look like there's anything in this email.
Oh no, it didn't get attached. Oh, I so want to show you guys this. It's so fun. Huh, it says it's attached on mine.
Let's see.
Okay, and I can't share a screen from here.
No, I can.
Okay. Uh-oh. All right, let's see, because all the links are in my hard drive, so I don't have public access to them.
Is the link would that be in the PDF maybe?
No, because it's on my SharePoint. That's
Gotcha.
weird. That did come up blank. Let me try one more time. Funky. So weird. It copied over initially, but when I went to open it, it didn't open either. Are there questions that we can answer in the short term?
Yeah, we've actually had a lot of questions. One in particular, I guess, that we had kind of been alluding to is, right, there's the vaccination attempt that takes place with the black-footed ferrets. Is the reason for not doing that with the existing prairie dogs just because of species like time turnovers and how short their lifespan is?
So there is, we did develop. When I say we, it's like collective partnership, like U.S. Geological Service and others developed a vaccine for prairie dogs. And it needs to be applied annually. So individual vaccination of ferrets does require individual handling. And because there's only less than 300 in the wild, it's not so difficult to do, relatively speaking. Whereas prairie dogs are very numerous, right? And so you can't just live trap and vaccinate individual prairie dogs, which is why we developed the oral delivery vaccine. Yeah, that's so wild. So every time I pull this up, it has the link. All right, let me see if I can just have it save and send one more time. And so, yeah, in order to cover thousands of acres and millions of prairie dogs, there was a sylvatic plague vaccine for prairie dogs developed. And that's when we developed the triple shooters to attach to a drone or an ATV to help distribute all those baits. And the whole concept of that is enough prairie dogs in a colony eat enough baits for herd immunity. Like not every prairie dog is going to eat an individual peanut butter flavored bait, but if we get enough of them eating it, then there's enough protection herd wise. That's kind of the concept behind it all. Because some prairie dogs are little pigs and they're going to eat like 5 of them and others won't eat any. So it's pretty hilarious. But that sylvatic plague vaccine works to protect prairie dogs at a certain level, but not enough prairie dogs to keep ferrets alive. So we have pivoted now to Randy Matchett's FIP bits, which are fipronil laced peanut butter oral baits that have the same, it's not a vaccination, but it's a systemic product. So like for those of you who have dogs and cats and use products like Frontline, it's a little dropper, you put it on their skin and it gets into their bloodstream, and then a flea or a tick that lands and tries to get a blood meal off that animal dies. So the Fitbits have a little bit of fipronil in them. A prairie dog consumes it, it gets put into their bloodstream, a flea lands on it, they die. Even prairie dogs that poop out those Fitbit excrements, the flea larvae that lands on their poop dies. So it's pretty cool and highly effective. So we like the idea of large scale distribution of plague protecting oral baits for prairie dogs because it's much faster than the 2 alternatives, which is the dust, which sprayed down into each prairie dog burrow, kills fleas on contact, or lines the burrow. And if a prairie dog comes through, puts a little dust on the prairie dog, helps them with a little flea protection. Or the grain, fipronil grain. I think Noel talked about this too, where it's just grain the prairie dog eats, same thing, it systematically protects them. So there's some cool stuff along those lines that work really well.
Is the distribution for those like the Fitbits as well with the drone? Could you just distribute it so you don't have to do like the actual ATV driving around and like to all the field sites as like by hand?
Yeah, we can cover 100 acres per hour on a drone.
Nice.
And about 50 acres per hour on an ATV. So it's cool. Like we developed the kind of first generation triple shooters for both the drone and the ATV. And then, we had some snafus with the sylvatic plague vaccine. We had some snafus with crashing drones. And so like we put a lot of energy into like the next generation triple shooters, next generation drones. So now we've been putting out Fitbits with triple shooters on ATVs in the last couple of years. And this summer we're gearing up to get the drone out. So it's pretty exciting. And we've got a target of like, I think up to 10,000 acres this year and then 20,000 acres every year after that until we can scale up.
I think the drones make it much more scalable, and these new alternative methods that y'all are developing for the delivery mechanisms makes it more manageable and easier to be able to do. So it's again really cool bringing back to the innovation side of things of all the different pieces of tech that y'all have to come up with. It really like goes down to, again, it's such a big effort of so many hats and so many pieces of tech that y'all having to develop constantly. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. I am working on saving this. The file was way too big, so I am just going to try the drone video here. So bear with me. Other questions? Other thoughts?
One question that was had, with respect to the changes in the rainwater and the environment as we're coming through, how much of that do you feel is due to climate change? And if that is a big factor, how does that manifest in your prediction of what's going to happen the next season, right? Like, when is this a good time to release ferrets? Can we predict if there's going to be a drought or not, right? How much is actually consistent in the areas where you're doing this work, and how much of it is just you're just kind of fingers crossed?
Yes, all. Yes, and it is highly complicated. A lot of climate models predict cool, wet, dry, dry, so which one's right? We don't know, because there's been some efforts to look at like, instead of like spending $30 an acre every year to protect and prevent plague from occurring, to protect prairie dogs from plague and prevent plague from occurring at these ferret sites, because it's much easier to prevent it than it is to combat it. Because once it's there, it can be hard to get rid of, and also hard to stop. So an ounce of prevention, is really good medicine there. Some of the climate models were like, can we use, there's been a lot of research that goes into like what preceding conditions the summer before can that lead to predictions of plague, and if you knew that plague was highly likely, then you could get out there and do it. And if you thought, okay, well, plague probably isn't going to come this year because it's been dry, flea loads are low, we haven't had a wet spring, so the vegetation's not that tall, so it's probably not going to be a big flea year, maybe we can skip plague mitigation this year. It's risky, right? Like, you have to put your faith in a model that may or may not be right, and it's up to you, like, can I afford to lose these ferrets and the investment in them by not proactively putting plague tools out there? So we don't have a magic tool for drought or like flooded conditions, right? Like, it's tricky. Like, the prairie dog burrows are pretty amazing flood preventers. The burrows themselves are high and water can sheet around them. So that's not as much of a concern in terms of like drowning ferrets or prairie dogs, although I'm sure it happens in places. But we haven't nailed how we are going to address drought. We're looking at like at the northern extent of their range in Canada. The only black-footed ferret population that ever got reintroduced there, experienced large-scale prairie dog population declines because of drought, and then plague came in. And, they tried some food trials with prairie dogs, which helps, but it's hard, and it's like, again, how are we going to manage this? I don't know. We have to do our part to not contribute to greenhouse gases, for one. But yeah, we have a huge area of work to dive into, looking more at the plague climate connection, but also like what options do we have available to us? And I think a lot of it is like, well, there's going to be some places like in mixed grass prairie where we might get lucky and drought conditions won't prevail. And so we can keep enough of those blinking Christmas tree lights on at one point in time where those populations exist. Yeah, but the struggle is real.
I think the other part of the struggle too, like you're mentioning, if it's going from Canada down to Mexico and everything in between, is that the range, right, that they naturally had, and you're trying to find land spots that are big enough to house enough prairie dogs to be able to release the ferrets, which also, by the way, crazy, right? That's a huge spread of an ecosystem. And in respect to climate change and droughts, that's going to make a model even harder to create a measure, right? So it's like, it's again, I feel like that's why people should listen to the part where you were chatting about the inspiration that you find, because there's just so many things going against each one of these elements, and the fact that you're still able to be successful at it is a testament to the amount of work that y'all do as a team and to make this happen. Because like at any one of these steps, right, like you were saying, it could all just fall apart.
Yeah, and it does at times, and you have to start over, even if you do all the things right. Eventually it'll rain, we hope, right? Eventually the prairie dogs will come back. If there's one thing we know, is that if the habitat, if you build it, they will come, kind of deal, and so yeah, you hope you don't lose so many prairie dogs that you can't bring it back. We can produce more ferrets in captivity and put more ferrets out, but that's an expensive venture. It could be like $6,000, $6,500 for each ferret, maybe more depending on which site grows them. How much transportation costs, driving ferrets from Colorado to South Dakota, or flying them to Arizona, there's some costs involved there. Yeah, and I think it's like, well, how can we learn from other recovery efforts, other species, other ecosystems, like the the gradient of habitat variation from north to south, west to east. You've got cool season grasses and warm season grasses and tall grass and short grass and everything in between. And it's like, you know that there are prairie dogs and other wildlife living in deserts and finding moisture and surviving despite all odds. It's like, how can these guys do this? And so, like, what is about those animals that can, like, withstand drought? Or what is it about the 1% or 2% of prairie dogs that don't die from a plague outbreak? What is that? You know, like, how are we going to figure out what those cool things are that jump survival levels in individual that we might be able to take and apply to a larger population, right? Like, there's so much to learn there, I feel like.
I think, Kristy, one of the important questions here too, as we're rounding out our discussion, because I'm so, we scheduled, I think we had for 45 minutes and we've had you for over
I
2
like, I don't even
hours,
know
which
what time it is.
I hope it's okay. I think, the
That's
community's
totally
I've been actually asking a lot of questions throughout the interview, weaving it in, as, folks have been so excited about learning. What can someone do at home? Like, because again, I just want to highlight what a monumental task you and your team are working against, right, to bring these animals back. What can, the regular dude at home, not even necessarily living in the Midwest and the prairies, but let's say is over in Scotland and has been touched by your story, what can that individual do? What can we at home do to help you achieve this goal?
Oh, I love it. I feel like there's an acronym. If you go to WWF blackfootedferret.org, I'm trying to find this. There's a cool acronym that says Ferret, and it talks about things you can do there. I will try to find this right page while we're chatting too. But and this other thing is not uploading. I feel awful. I think kind of one of the biggest challenges we have is just education, right? Like, how can we collectively change the narrative that prairie dogs are bad and evil, to one of, yeah, they might be a mixed bag, but they have a role and ferrets need them. And so how can we share what we know and make that a little bit more common knowledge? So sharing what you know is huge. I feel like one of the coolest things you can do is have your own experience, ideally with a ferret, if you can find a zoo that has a captive ferret or a display center that has a captive ferret, go see them, go learn about them. Call me, we can set you up to see a ferret in the wild or help with a release, volunteer, do your part to learn about your own wildlife in your own area, even if you're in an urban center. You have wildlife where you live. If it's of interest to you, get curious, ask questions like, how is it that this coyote is living among 2 million people in New York City Central Park, right? Like, there's just so many cool things to do and learn about. So, like, educate yourselves on some of those things. I feel like, too, anything you can do to contribute to reducing global warming is probably really, really critical for just the future of all of us. And, if we don't have a globe, we don't have wildlife, we don't have people, we don't have, we're sunk ship, right? So, like, do your part, figure out how to turn your lights off more, participate in Earth Hour, volunteer for cleanup efforts, reduce your footprint, reduce your carbon footprint, reduce your food footprint, reduce your recycling, reuse, recycle, all the things that make sense in terms of, like, we collectively, it feels a little overwhelming to think that one person can make a difference. But if we all take that attitude that, oh, my little thing of, like, okay, my town doesn't recycle plastic, but instead of buying another thing of laundry soap, I'm going to actually go refill it at the co-op or, whatever bulk store you have, or I'm going to now start buying laundry soap and powder with a cardboard box that I can recycle. Like all of that matters, because if we aren't reducing greenhouse gases, we can't stop these crazy climatic fluctuations that cause fires and droughts and plague and other disease outbreaks and tsunamis and floods that then affect ferrets, right? Like, yeah, ferrets might not be the most direct hit to some of these things, but it all connects. It's all connected. So familiarize yourself with what you can. If you can learn about ferrets and get hands-on and raise money, we always need fundraisers. Like if you, for example, the Girl Scouts picked black-footed ferrets as their mascot this year. And so while buying Girl Scout cookies doesn't actually give ferret recovery money, it helps educate people. So go eat the cookies, read the box, go to this blackfootedferret.org website, learn a little bit more about what we do and who we are and how ferrets need to be, and share it. Share what you know.
I
And
love that.
you know what?
Here on the
Yeah.
channel, we say someone's as wholesome as ferret. As we support black-footed ferrets, that's been one of our favorite, like here on the science community, conservation success stories, because like you mentioned, it goes from the genetic bottleneck, right? So you have a lot of genetics, the field work that goes into it, the frozen zoo connection, colonial reintroduction of genetics, right? It's just a really unique and beautiful conservation success story on what could be. But like you've illustrated today, it's not done. The goal to delist it, right, is 3,000, and it's at 300, and that doesn't come cheap. And it also comes with a big educational barrier, like you said, to get over the dislike, right, of prairie dogs, which is critical for these animals to be able to survive.
Yeah. Host a fun run. Send some of the proceeds to, BFF Safe program, or, on the blackfootedferret.org site. We are shifting from a friends group to this conservation foundation. So we are, trying to raise money, $20 million a year, for example, to keep ferrets alive. And in the face of federal budget cuts, we're working a lot harder now for that. If you have interest in being in this field, go to school, get an internship, shadow somebody that you are inspired by. If it's not in the field of wildlife, that's fine. Live your bliss. Follow your bliss. Joseph Campbell always said that. Follow your bliss. Like, if you believe in what you do, you're making a difference, right? And that helps ferrets somehow, right? It helps the world. So, like, be a good person and follow your heart. Do what you love, because that, at the end of the day, matters more than anything else.
I absolutely love that. That is such a beautiful idea and sentiment to wrap up our discussion today, Kristy, because it's also like a shining example of what you did as well, right? From originally wanting to go into wolf conservation and ending up in South Dakota with the black-footed ferret, and just like the light in your eyes as you're talking about this animal and saving it. It's clear that you're the right person and there for the job, and you're the one that's making that world of a difference. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of leave us with in terms of that's a beautiful final message, but is there something else that you wanted to leave us with that we didn't touch on yet, and or a final thing to highlight?
If you're an engineer, if you're into climate science, call me. We need brains. We need ideas. We still have some tricky stuff figuring out. Oh, if you're like a Betty Baker and you're really good at figuring out how to make these oral baits not stick, candy coating or something, I don't know. We need brains. We need brain power. We need new ideas. So, yeah, if you guys have any ideas about how to grow grass in the face of no rain, let us know. No, I'm serious. If you're an engineer, we are always looking to develop new things. If you want to help me figure out how to make a passive transmitter into an active one, because ferrets can't really wear collars very well. We're trying it again. Smithsonian's got that project going, but these microchips are really great. They stay. So if you have brain power there, call me. Let's figure it out. Because if the more we can get better at counting ferrets in the wild, the better we can get at moving towards that needle. And, come help out. Give me a call. We love having people in the field. The more the merrier.
I love that, and I feel like many of the science folks would be calling, and I know my wife and I would also be absolutely calling.
Yes.
If you have any, need for biologists and geneticists, we're here. We even
Absolutely.
had someone in the chats like, do you have any use for a software dev from Scotland? Like, on our way.
Sure. Yeah, and I forget what software is used to do these daily trackers for prairie dogs, but like, yeah, we're working with a really cool guy in the UK on that, right? Like, because we're biologists, some of us don't have all this information and programming and knowledge, there's just no shortage of things that we need to get better at. So we welcome all brain power.
Kristy, thank you so much for your time today. I know, again, we were 45 minutes. I think we had chatted before, and we're at 2.5 hours. I hope it flew by for you. I know the community has been loving, like, so many questions coming in, so many messages about how incredible you are and how inspirational you are, and just everything. Thank you for doing what you do on a day-to-day basis, and for spending your time today with us to share your knowledge, your passion, and just answering all of our questions for over 2.5 hours. If you ever want to come back on for a part 2 or 7, we would always love to have you back. This was absolutely incredible.
And I would love to bring some of my friends, because there's like really cool people that have lots of cool stories and lots of cool things too. So we could do a collective. Yeah, and just thank you. Like, this program is phenomenal. Like, all right, one more story. When I was growing up, we were allowed to watch one TV show a week. I chose Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and many of you probably aren't old enough to know that, but there was this guy, Marlon Perkins, was that his name, or Marty Stuffer? Anyway, one of those guys. And, he was highlighting wildlife stuff. So he would go around, he would talk about gorillas, he would talk about rhinos, he would talk about this. And I was like, oh my God, I want to do what that guy does. And so like that's kind of how I got into wildlife. Like, I grew up rural, my grandparents had a dairy farm. So there were always critters around. My parents loved animals. We grew up on some acreage in Vermont, so there was always critters around. But like, the inspiration that Wild Kingdom gave me is what you are doing for today's generation, Bayland. And so it's wicked cool. And you're taking it to a whole nother level of like really deep diving into this work and the species and the things that are happening. And so you are an inspiration to all of us, and all of you following this program and this show. Thank you, because again, like, this is the stuff that makes the world go around, and it's so fun. Science is cool.
It's so cool, and there's so much to do, and everyone can be involved, right? There's a place for it. Like you mentioned, right? Your story about the gentleman that pulled up alongside you and was squirreling for a fight. And guess what? He had a place too. Everyone has a place in science. And I love that, you're the one who's chatting with us today. And that really exemplifies that everyone's welcome at this table of learning. And just truly thank you for everything you do, Kristy. This was an absolute blast. And yes, if your friends ever want to come on and you want to come on again, you have the email. We at always sharing this love of conservation and animals. That's our mission here. And thank you for being part of it.
Thank you. It's been a sheer honor. Take good care, everybody. Have fun.
Thank you, Kristy. Have a great evening.
Everyone, all backgrounds, all ages, all genders, and all walks of life deserve an education. Come be one of us.